Black woman humiliated on plane. But when she revealed who she was, the flight attendant panicked. Kimberly Johnson felt all eyes on her as the flight attendant raised her voice for the third time. The humiliation grew with each second in that cramped first-class aisle on the flight between New York City and Miami. "Ma'am, I'll need to check your ticket again. I'm sure there's been some mistake," insisted the attendant, extending her hand with a forced smile that didn't hide her condescending tone. Kimberly took a deep breath. At 45, she had faced situations like this more times than she cared to remember. She handed over the e-ticket on her phone for the fourth time, maintaining the composure she'd honed over 2 decades in the corporate world. "As I've already confirmed, seat 3A is mine. Everything is in order," Kimberly replied, adjusting her impeccably tailored blazer. Her small carry-on, the only luggage she'd brought for the quick business trip, was stowed in the overhead compartment. The attendant, whose badge identified her as Ashley Miller, examined the ticket with undisguised suspicion. Other passengers watched the awkward scene, some curious, others averting their gaze, but all aware of what was really happening. "It's just that normally our first-class passengers are—" Ashley hesitated, realizing too late what she was about to say. Akai notified about the benefits before boarding. "Did you receive all the information?" The attendant's true meaning was clear to everyone. Kimberly didn't match the profile Ashley expected to see in first class. A black woman, even dressed in a Ralph Lauren suit and carrying a Coach briefcase, seemed out of place in the attendant's eyes. "I received all the necessary information, thank you," Kimberly replied firmly, slipping her phone back into her bag. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I'd like to settle in before takeoff." Ashley didn't move. "Perhaps you'd prefer a seat in business class. There's more legroom back there, and—" "The seat I purchased is this one," Kimberly interrupted, her patience thinning. "And we've already confirmed 3 times that everything is in order with my ticket." A man in the neighboring seat, who had been watching while pretending to read a magazine, finally spoke up. "Is there a problem? We're delaying takeoff." Ashley smiled at the man, a middle-aged white executive. "No problem at all, Mr. Nelson. We're just verifying a few details." The fact that the attendant knew the other passenger by name without checking his ticket didn't escape Kimberly. "I'll call my supervisor," Ashley announced, before walking away down the aisle. Kimberly sat down, trying to ignore the curious stares. Her phone buzzed. A message from her assistant confirming the meeting with the board of directors in Miami. A meeting that would change not just her career, but the future of thousands of employees. Moments later, Ashley returned with a tall man whose badge identified him as Thomas Wilson, the cabin supervisor. "Good afternoon, ma'am. It seems we have a situation here," Thomas said, keeping his tone professional, but looking at Kimberly with the same suspicion as Ashley. Kimberly was about to respond when her phone rang. On the screen, the name Richard Thompson, CEO of Liberty Airways, flashed insistently. She answered, holding the phone to her ear. "Richard, I'm boarding." "Now, yes, I'll make it in time for the board meeting." Kimberly paused, looking directly at the supervisor and attendant waiting beside her. "Actually, I'm having some trouble settling into my first-class seat." "Yes, I believe there's some resistance from the crew in accepting that. This is really my seat." Thomas's expression changed instantly, as if he'd been struck by lightning. "Don't worry, Richard," Kimberly continued. "I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding. Tomorrow, when I officially take over as chair of Liberty Airways Board of Directors, we can review the passenger service protocols. Yes, of course. We'll address it in the first meeting." Ashley's face visibly paled. Her hands trembled as she clutched her clipboard. "You're—" Thomas stammered, unable to finish the sentence. Kimberly calmly ended the call and put her phone away. "Kimberly Johnson, starting tomorrow, chair of this airline's board of directors, but today, just a first-class passenger who'd very much like to take off on time." The silence that followed was deafening. Thomas recovered first, quickly adopting an overly attentive demeanor. "Ms. Johnson, my sincerest apologies. There's clearly been a terrible misunderstanding. Ashley is new to our team and still in training. May I offer you champagne, a special meal, anything to make up for this unfortunate incident?" Kimberly shook her head. "Just the standard service offered to any first-class passenger will be fine, thank you." Thomas made a sharp gesture toward Ashley, who seemed frozen. Of course, right away. Ashley, bring champagne for Ms. Johnson now. Kimberly looked at the flight attendant, who still hadn't moved. Water will be fine, thank you. With a quick nod, Thomas practically dragged Ashley away, finally leaving Kimberly alone with her thoughts. She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of what had just happened and what was to come. Tomorrow she wouldn't just be the new chair of the board of the third largest airline in the United States. She would be the first black woman to hold such a position. The plane took off 20 minutes later. Kimberly tried to focus on the documents she needed to review before the meeting, but her mind kept returning to the incident. It wasn't the first time she'd faced prejudice, and she knew it wouldn't be the last. From her start as an intern at a small logistics company in Atlanta, her hometown, to becoming VP of operations for a multinational corporation, every step had been a struggle. During the flight, Kimberly noticed Thomas frequently checking to see if she needed anything, while Ashley kept noticeably distant. Once, passing by the galley, Kimberly saw the flight attendant sitting on a bench, quietly crying as a colleague tried to comfort her. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing. When the plane landed at Miami International Airport, Kimberly organized her documents in her briefcase. She was eager to leave that experience behind and focus on the challenge ahead. The acquisition of Liberty Airways by the business group she represented had been kept under wraps, known only to top executives and board members. Tomorrow, when the news was officially announced, it would mark a new chapter for the airline, which had been struggling financially for years. As she stood to disembark, Kimberly noticed the other first-class passengers had been instructed to exit before her, leaving her last, surely an order from Thomas to avoid further embarrassment. She picked up her briefcase and walked down the empty aisle. At the boarding door, to her surprise, she found Ashley waiting. The flight attendant's eyes were red, her expression one of anguish she couldn't hide. Ms. Johnson, said Ashley with a trembling voice, I'd like to personally apologize for my behavior. It was completely unacceptable and... Kimberly raised her hand, cutting her off. This is neither the time nor the place, Ms. Miller. Please, insisted Ashley, her voice nearly breaking. I need you to know that I didn't mean to... A group of executives was approaching, and Kimberly knew they were representatives from Liberty Airways sent to greet her. There was no time for this conversation. I have a meeting now, Ms. Miller, and I believe you have work to do as well. Ashley nodded, swallowing hard. Yes, ma'am, thank you for not requesting my immediate dismissal. Kimberly looked at the flight attendant, seeing more than just a woman afraid of losing her job. There was something else in her eyes, something Kimberly couldn't quite decipher at that moment. Have a good day, Ms. Miller. With that, Kimberly walked toward the waving executives, leaving Ashley standing in place, watching her go. The meeting at Liberty Airways Regional headquarters in Miami lasted late into the night. Kimberly reviewed the final details of the acquisition with the legal and financial teams, preparing for the official announcement the next day. After the meeting, back in her hotel room, she finally had a moment to relax. Lying on the bed with her laptop still open beside her, displaying financial projections, Kimberly allowed herself to think again about the incident on the plane. Situations like that were painfully familiar to her. The suspicious glances, the assumption that she didn't belong in that space, the surprise when they discovered her position. Her phone rang. It was her younger sister Melissa calling from Atlanta. So, did you get there okay? How was the trip? Melissa asked, her voice bringing a little comfort from home. The usual, Kimberly replied, avoiding details. She didn't want to worry her sister. Oh no, Kimberly, not again. What happened this time? Kimberly sighed. Melissa knew her too well. A flight attendant who didn't believe my seat was in first class. Nothing I haven't seen before. And what did you do? What I always do. Stayed calm, proved I was right, and moved on. There was a pause on the other end of the line. One day you won't have to prove anything to anyone, Melissa finally said. Kimberly smiled sadly. Maybe, but not tomorrow. After hanging up, Kimberly stared at the ceiling, thinking about her sister's words. Since childhood, growing up, in the suburbs of Atlanta, daughters of a teacher and a bus driver, they had been taught they'd have to work twice as hard for half the recognition. Kimberly had taken that lesson to the extreme, dedicating her life to her career, sacrificing lasting relationships, and even the possibility of starting a family. At 45, she was respected in the financial world, but every new achievement, every new environment still came with the same look of disbelief she had seen in Ashley's eyes. As if silently saying, "Are you sure you're supposed to be here?" The next morning, Kimberly woke early, dressed in one of her most elegant suits, and prepared for the day that would change her career. The announcement of Liberty Airways' acquisition and her appointment as chair of the board would be made at 10 a.m. in a press conference. As she sipped coffee in the hotel restaurant, her phone buzzed with a notification. It was a message from Michael Stevens, the corporate communications director. "Kimberly, we have a problem. A video of yesterday's incident on the plane is circulating on social media. The press is already asking for a statement. We need to talk urgently." Kimberly felt her stomach drop. She immediately opened the app mentioned in the message and found the video. Filmed by a passenger, it clearly showed Ashley repeatedly questioning her ticket and suggesting she should be in economy class, followed by the moment Kimberly answered the phone and revealed who she was. The video ended with the shocked faces of the flight attendant and the supervisor. In less than 12 hours, the video had been shared thousands of times, accompanied by hashtags like "Ochi Flying While Black" and "Discrimination Airways." Outraged comments multiplied, many demanding Ashley's dismissal, others attacking the airline for discriminatory practices. Kimberly left her coffee half-finished and went up to her room. She had barely closed the door when her phone rang. It was Richard Thompson, still the president of Liberty Airways, at least until that morning's official announcement. "Kimberly, have you seen the video?" "I just did," she replied, keeping her voice calm despite the storm brewing in her mind. "This couldn't have happened at a worse time. The company is already dealing with an image crisis after last month's flight cancellations, and now this." Richard's voice trembled with nerves. "I've ordered the immediate suspension of the flight attendant involved. We're preparing an official statement, condemning any form of discrimination and—" "Richard," Kimberly interrupted, "don't take any action yet. Let's discuss this in person before the press conference. But we need an immediate response. Social media is on fire. And that's exactly why we shouldn't act impulsively. I'll see you in an hour at headquarters." Kimberly hung up, knowing her decision would surprise many. The expected reaction would be to demand Ashley's immediate dismissal, position herself as the victim, and use the incident to show how she'd be a different kind of leader. It would be the easiest route, the one most applauded on social media. But something inside her said there was more to the story. As she got ready to leave, Kimberly received another message. It was from Liberty Airways' legal team, informing her that Ashley Miller, the flight attendant involved in the incident, had been suspended pending an internal investigation following company protocol. Attached to the message was Ashley's employee file, 32 years old, 7 years with the company, inconsistent performance reviews in recent months after a medical leave. One detail caught Kimberly's attention. Ashley was a single mother of 2 and also supported her elderly mother, who had Alzheimer's. That explained the desperation in the flight attendant's eyes when she said, "Thank you for not calling for my immediate dismissal." It wasn't just Ashley's job on the line, it was the livelihood of an entire family. Kimberly put her phone away, grabbed her briefcase and headed downstairs. In the hotel lobby, a driver was already waiting to take her to Liberty Airways' headquarters. During the ride, she looked out the window at Miami, with its contrast of modern beachfront buildings and struggling neighborhoods farther inland. A United States she knew well, having grown up on the outskirts of Atlanta. When she arrived at the airline's headquarters, Kimberly was greeted by a visibly nervous Richard. Before they even entered the meeting room, he launched into a string of justifications. "Kimberly, I want you to know that cases like this are completely isolated in our company. We have strict policies against discrimination and—" "Richard," Kimberly interrupted again as they walked down the glass-walled hallway, overlooking the airport runway. Let's talk about this in the meeting with everyone present. In the room, they were joined by Michael Stevens, head of communications, Pamela Williams, head of human resources, and 2 company lawyers. Everyone wore tense expressions and worried glances. "How's the fallout?" Kimberly asked Michael as she took her seat at the head of the table. "Terrible," he replied, showing graphs on his tablet. "The video has already surpassed 1 million views. We're being torn apart on social media. The hashtag Zonjaka Boycott Liberty Airways has been trending since early this morning." Pamela Williams interjected, "The flight attendant's suspension has already been processed. We're prepared to announce her termination for just cause as soon as we authorize it." Kimberly Johnson studied the HR director, a white woman in her 60s, who spoke with the technical detachment of someone who had handled many similar crises before. "I want to know more about Ashley Miller," said Kimberly. "I've only seen a summary of her file. How long has she worked in first class?" Pamela seemed surprised by the question. "She was transferred to first class about 3 months ago. Before that, she only worked domestic flights in economy." "And why the transfer?" Pamela flipped through some documents in her folder. It was part of an internal career development program. She requested the transfer after returning from medical leave. "What kind of leave?" Pamela hesitated. "I don't have that specific information here, but I can look it up." One of the lawyers, silent until then, spoke up. "Ms. Johnson, with all due respect, the employee's medical history is irrelevant to the case. We have a clear incident of discrimination, captured on video, which is severely damaging the company's image. The standard response in situations like this is immediate termination." Kimberly fixed her gaze on the lawyer. "Your name is?" "Gregory Nelson, Legal Department." "Mr. Nelson, I believe that as the future chairwoman of the board, it's my prerogative to determine what is or isn't relevant in understanding a situation that directly involves me." Her voice was calm but firm. "Pamela, please check the reason for Ms. Miller's medical leave." Pamela nodded and left the room. Richard Thompson grew increasingly nervous. "Kimberly, I know you're trying to be fair, but we need to act quickly. The press conference is in less than an hour, and besides announcing the acquisition, we'll have to address this incident." Kimberly remained composed. "And we will address it, Richard, but my way." Michael Stevens, nervously glancing at his tablet, interjected, "The situation just got worse. A reporter from the Southern Herald just published that they've made contact with Ashley Miller. According to the article, the flight attendant is devastated and fears not just for her job, but for her ability to support her family, including 2 young children and a sick mother." Richard let out an exasperated sigh. "Great. Now we have both sides of the story going viral. If we fire her, we're racist. If we don't, we're condoning racism." Kimberly didn't respond immediately, considering the situation. Just then, Pamela returned. "I found the information. Ashley Miller was on leave for 3 months due to depression and anxiety." Pamela paused, seeming hesitant. "There's a note from the medical department suggesting her condition may have been related to workplace pressures, but there are no specific details." "Workplace pressures?" Kimberly repeated thoughtfully. "Did she file any formal complaints?" Pamela flipped through more documents. "There's no record of formal complaints, but..." She hesitated again. "I found a note about an informal meeting with HR, where she mentioned feeling uncomfortable with comments from colleagues and supervisors. Nothing was formally documented after that." Kimberly nodded, the pieces starting to fall into place in her mind. "I want to speak with her," she said finally. A stunned silence filled the room. "Speak with the flight attendant? Now?" Richard looked like he couldn't believe what he was hearing. "Kimberly, that's highly irregular. She's suspended and under investigation." "Exactly why," she replied. "I want to hear what she has to say before we make any decisions." "But the press conference..." "The press conference can wait 15 minutes, replied Kimberly, standing up. "Pamela, please ask Ashley Miller to come here now. If she's not in the building, arrange a car to pick her up." Pamela seemed hesitant but nodded and left again. "Kimberly, this is a terrible idea," warned Richard. "If the press finds out you're meeting with her before the conference..." "The press doesn't need to know," Kimberly answered, walking to the window. I'd like a few minutes alone to prepare. Please wait in the support room next door. I'll call you when I'm ready." Reluctantly, Richard and the others left, leaving Kimberly alone with her thoughts. She looked out the window, watching. The Liberty Airways planes lined up on the runway. She had worked tirelessly to get where she was, facing prejudice and resistance at every step. Now, on the eve of her greatest professional achievement, she found herself in the middle of a storm that could define how she would be seen, not just as an executive, but as a human being. About 20 minutes later, there was a soft knock at the door. Pamela entered, followed by Ashley Miller. The flight attendant was visibly nervous, wearing the company uniform but without the usual neck scarf, likely removed in haste when summoned. "Thank you, Pamela," said Kimberly. "You can leave us alone, please." Pamela seemed surprised but nodded and left, closing the door behind her. Kimberly and Ashley stood face to face in silence. The flight attendant kept her eyes down, her hands trembling in front of her. "Please sit down," Kimberly said, gesturing to a chair. Ashley obeyed, still avoiding direct eye contact. "Ms. Johnson, Ashley began, her voice choked. "Why did you question my place in first class?" Kimberly asked directly, interrupting her. "The truth, please." Ashley finally looked up, revealing red eyes from crying. "I was instructed," she answered, almost in a whisper. Kimberly leaned slightly forward. "Instructed? By whom?" "By Supervisor Thomas. He told me to double-check tickets for passengers who don't seem to belong in first class." Ashley swallowed hard. "When I asked what that meant, he was more specific. He said to keep an eye on black people, especially unaccompanied women, because they're usually benefiting from mileage programs they don't fully understand." Kimberly felt a wave of anger rise through her body, but kept her expression neutral. "And you thought that was normal?" Ashley shook her head, a tear running down her face. "No, ma'am. That's why I requested a transfer from economy. I thought in first class with fewer passengers this kind of procedure would be less common." She paused, but it was worse, much worse. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing, explain. In economy, it was just occasional comments among the crew. In first class, there are unofficial protocols, checklists about which passengers should receive special attention and which should be. She hesitated. "I'd watched more closely. And you followed these protocols even though you disagreed with them?" Ashley nodded, ashamed. "I needed this job, Mom. My mother has Alzheimer's. My kids are young and—" She stopped, realizing it sounded like an excuse. "But that doesn't justify it. I should have refused, I should have reported it. But every time I tried to speak up, I was told not to make trouble." Kimberly observed the woman in front of her, recognizing something she often saw in her own journey, the dilemma between fighting the system or surviving within it. "How long have you worked at Liberty Airways, Ashley?" 7 years, ma'am." "And at any point did you formally report your concerns about these unofficial protocols?" Ashley hesitated, looking even more uncomfortable. "I tried about a year ago. I sent an email to the ethics department, reporting discriminatory instructions we received during training." Her voice wavered. 2 weeks later, I was called into a meeting with my manager and the HR director. They said there had been a misunderstanding and that I had misinterpreted the company's guidelines. "Was Pamela Williams in that meeting?" Kimberly asked, surprised. "Yes, ma'am. She told me the company valued diversity and that my accusations were serious and unfounded. After that, I started getting negative evaluations. My schedule was changed. I got more night and weekend flights, which made it harder to care for my kids and my mother." Ashley wiped away a tear. 3 months later, I had an anxiety attack during a flight. I was put on leave for psychological issues. Kimberly felt the weight of Ashley's story. This wasn't just an isolated case of discrimination. It was something systematic, institutionalized, disguised under layers of misunderstandings and misinterpretations. "Why are you still here, Ashley? Why not look for another job?" The flight attendant gave a sad smile. "Liberty Airways pays better than other airlines. The health plan covers my mother's treatments. I've tried other opportunities, but with my leave history, it's been hard. She looked directly at Kimberly. Besides, I love what I do. I love taking care of passengers, flying, seeing new places. I just don't like... She hesitated again. Being complicit in discrimination, Kimberly finished. Ashley nodded, lowering her gaze. I'm not racist, Miss Johnson. I just became part of a system that is. And yesterday, when I realized what I'd done, when I saw who you were, Her voice broke completely. I felt my whole world crumbling. Not just because of my job, but because I realized how much I'd become part of the problem. Kimberly checked her watch. There were only 20 minutes left before the press conference. Ashley, do you have a record of that email you sent to the ethics department? Yes, ma'am, I keep copies of everything. And would you be willing to speak publicly about this? Ashley paled. I'd lose my job. I'd be blacklisted in the industry. Not necessarily, Kimberly replied. An idea forming in her mind. Not if I can help it. She stood and walked to the door, opening it to find Richard, Pamela, and the others anxiously waiting in the hallway. Gentlemen, I'm ready for the press conference, but there will be some changes to the script. The Liberty Airways press. Room was packed. Reporters from across the country crowded in, eager not just for the acquisition announcement, but especially for the response to the video that had gone viral on social media. On stage, a table with 5 seats had been prepared. Backstage, Richard questioned Kimberly's decision one last time. Are you sure about this? Putting the flight attendant beside you for the announcement is a huge risk. It's not a risk, Richard. It's an opportunity, Kimberly replied calmly, adjusting her blazer. Trust me. Richard shook his head, resigned. Your first official day hasn't even started, and you're already turning the company upside down. Kimberly smiled. That's why you hired me, isn't it? At exactly 10 a.m., Kimberly stepped onto the stage accompanied by Richard Michael Stevens, a representative from the business group that had acquired Liberty Airways, and, to everyone's surprise, Ashley Miller, still wearing her flight attendant uniform. A murmur spread through the room. No one expected to see the racist flight attendant from the video seated beside the executive, who had been the target of discrimination. Richard was the first to speak, formally announcing Liberty Airways' acquisition by the business group and introducing Kimberly Johnson as the new chairwoman of the board. Then he yielded the floor to Kimberly, who rose gracefully and walked to the podium. Good morning, everyone, she began, her steady voice filling the room. As has been announced, starting today, I assume the role of chairwoman of Liberty Airways Board of Directors, a responsibility I take with the utmost seriousness and commitment. She paused briefly. However, before we discuss the company's future, we must address the incident many of you have already seen on social media. A tense silence fell over the room. Yesterday, I was the victim of discrimination on a flight with this very airline. Flight attendant Ashley Miller, who is seated here beside me, repeatedly questioned my right to be in first class, suggesting I should move to economy. The incident was filmed and widely shared. Camera flashes erupted incessantly, capturing Kimberly's solemn expression and Ashley's visible discomfort. The expected response, the easy way out, would be to announce Miss Miller's termination and assure everyone this was an isolated incident, a bad apple in an otherwise healthy organization. Kimberly looked directly into the cameras, but that would be a lie. A fresh murmur rippled through the room. Pamela Williams, seated in the front row, visibly paled. What happened yesterday was not an isolated incident. It was the result of unwritten policies, veiled directives, and an organizational culture that normalizes discrimination and punishes those who challenge it. Kimberly paused to let her words sink in. I learned this morning that Miss Miller, a year ago, attempted to report discriminatory practices within the company. As a result, she faced retaliation, developed psychological distress, and nearly lost her job. Pamela Williams abruptly stood and left the room, discreetly followed by one of the lawyers. The real story here is not about a racist flight attendant or a humiliated executive. It's about a system that turns ordinary people into accomplices of discriminatory practices out of fear. Fear of losing their jobs, their dignity, their ability to support their families. Kimberly gestured toward Ashley. This woman is not the problem. She is another victim of a far larger, deeply rooted issue. And it is that issue I intend to confront as chairwoman. Kimberly then announced the immediate launch of 3 initiatives: an independent committee to investigate discriminatory practices within the company, a comprehensive anti-discrimination training program for all employees, and a direct channel for reporting harassment and discrimination with guaranteed anonymity and protection from retaliation. And to lead this committee, I have invited Miss Ashley Miller. A new murmur, even louder, spread through the room. No one understands the problem from the inside better than someone who has lived it, and no one is better suited to help find the necessary solutions. Ashley, visibly moved, gave a slight nod. I know many will question this decision, Kimberly continued. They'll say I'm being naive, that I'm exposing the company to greater risk. But I firmly believe that only by confronting our problems with honesty and courage can we truly change them. She paused. I am not here merely to improve Liberty Airways' financial performance. I'm here to transform this into a truly inclusive company, where every person, regardless of their color, gender, background, or social status, is treated with the same respect and dignity. The press conference ended with a round of applause. As Kimberly Johnson answered the journalists' questions, with Ashley Miller occasionally adding to her responses, Richard Thompson watched everything with a mix of concern and admiration. After years of trying to hide the company's problems, here was someone willing to expose and confront them head-on. In the days that followed, the story took on national proportions. The original video, which had sparked outrage against Ashley, and the airline, was now accompanied by another, the press conference, where Kimberly Johnson turned a crisis into an opportunity for real change. Kimberly's decision was polarizing. Some criticized her, arguing she was making excuses for racism. Others applauded her, recognizing her courage in addressing a systemic problem rather than just punishing an individual. The hashtag #MoreKimberlysInCharge spread across social media. For Ashley, the following days were a whirlwind of emotions. From national villain, she had become a complex symbol, someone who had made a mistake, acknowledged it, and was now actively working to change the system that had led her to it. She received both messages of support and hate. Some accused her of opportunism, others praised her for her courage. A week after the press conference, Kimberly called Ashley into a meeting in her new office at Liberty Airways headquarters in New York City. Ashley, still adjusting to her new role, entered nervously. "How are things?" Kimberly asked, gesturing to a chair for Ashley to sit. "Confusing," Ashley answered honestly. "Half the people treat me like a hero, half look at me like I'm a traitor." Kimberly smiled understandingly. "That's the price of change. Not everyone is ready for it. It's hard for my family too. My kids don't understand why some people say bad things about their mom online." Ashley paused. "But I know I'm doing the right thing, for the first time in a long while." Kimberly nodded, satisfied. "Has the committee started receiving reports?" "Yes, a lot of them." Ashley opened a folder she had brought. "In just 1 week, we've gotten over 50 complaints about discrimination and harassment. Not just race-related, but also gender, sexual orientation, and regional background." Kimberly sighed. "I figured as much. The deeper we dig, the more we find." "Some complaints are against high-ranking people," Ashley added hesitantly, "including Pamela Williams." "I'm not surprised. Pamela represents Liberty Airways' old management model." Kimberly paused thoughtfully. "We'll need a lot of determination to change this culture, and you'll be key in this process, Ashley." The flight attendant, now coordinator of the Anti-Discrimination Committee, smiled nervously. "I still wonder why you trusted me. After what I did." "Precisely because of what you did," Kimberly interrupted. "You've experienced both sides. You were both a perpetrator and a victim of discrimination. That gives you a perspective few have." Ashley nodded thoughtfully. "You're right. I know how easy it is to become part of the problem when your livelihood depends on it. And I know how painful it is to realize you've become what you always despised." The two women continued their conversation, discussing strategies for the committee and plans for the future. Though they came from different worlds, Kimberly from the top of the corporate ladder and Ashley from the operational ranks, a mutual respect had grown between them, rooted in a shared understanding that changing oppressive systems requires more than punishing individuals. It demands transforming structures. 3 months later, Liberty Airways officially launched its new diversity and inclusion program. The ceremony, held in the company's main hangar in Newark, brought together employees from all levels, from pilots and executives to cleaning and maintenance crews. Kimberly and Ashley took the stage together to announce the changes: a new code of conduct with clear anti-discrimination guidelines, mandatory training for all employees, and an evaluation system that considered inclusive behaviors. Additionally, the company introduced a scholarship program for children of low-income employees, with a special focus on underrepresented communities. The first beneficiaries were Ashley's children, something Kimberly made sure to announce personally. "This isn't favoritism," Kimberly explained to the audience. "It's restitution. These young people nearly lost their educational opportunities because of the stigma unfairly tied to their mother. We're simply righting a wrong." The event received widespread media coverage. The story of Kimberly and Ashley, two women who turned a moment of conflict into an opportunity for change, sparked national debates about institutional racism and corporate accountability. Of course, not everything went smoothly. There was internal resistance, particularly from managers, who felt threatened by the new policies. Some argued the company was going too far and giving in to internet pressure. Pamela Williams, faced with multiple harassment and discrimination complaints, chose to leave the company before the internal investigation concluded. Externally, Liberty Airways faced both praise and criticism. Some market analysts questioned whether the focus on diversity was diverting attention from the company's financial struggles. Others argued that Kimberly's transparent approach was actually strengthening the brand in the long run. For Kimberly, however, the true measure of success wasn't newspaper headlines or financial reports, but the changes she saw in the company's daily operations, like how supervisors now took harassment complaints seriously, or how diversity training had evolved from rote exercises to genuine discussions about bias and inclusion. One afternoon, about 6 months after becoming board chair, Kimberly was boarding a Liberty Airways flight to Atlanta, her hometown. It was a personal trip to visit family during the holiday. As she entered first class, she was greeted by a young flight attendant who checked her ticket with a warm smile. "Welcome aboard, Ms. Johnson. It's an honor to have you on our flight." Kimberly thanked her and made her way to her seat. As she settled in, she noticed something different. Looking around, she saw a diverse crew. The attendant serving champagne was a black man. The pilot who'd made the welcome announcement had a distinct southern accent, and among the first-class passengers were people of different ethnicities and styles. A small smile formed on Kimberly's lips. It was just one flight, just one moment, but it represented something she'd fought for her entire life: the right to belong, to occupy spaces, to be treated with dignity regardless of skin color. Her phone vibrated. It was a message from Ashley. "Just got the news. The independent audit confirmed the allegations against Thomas Wilson. He'll be removed today." "Thank you for not giving up," Kimberly replied with a simple message. "Thank you for having the courage to change." As the plane took off, Kimberly looked out the window, watching New York City fade into the distance. She thought about her journey, from the suburban girl who dreamed of being someone in life, to the executive now leading one of the country's largest airlines. She reflected on the obstacles she'd faced, the times she'd almost quit, the moments she'd questioned whether all the effort was worth it. And she thought about Ashley, a woman who, like so many others, had become complicit in an oppressive system out of fear and necessity. Someone who'd found the courage to acknowledge her mistakes and was now working to make amends. On that fateful morning on the plane, when Ashley had questioned her place in first class, Kimberly could have simply demanded her dismissal. She would have been applauded, seen as a warrior who wouldn't tolerate racism. Maybe she'd even have felt momentarily vindicated, but it wouldn't have changed anything. Another Ashley would have been hired, The same unofficial protocols would have continued. The system would have remained intact. Instead, Kimberly had chosen a harder path, confronting not just the symptom, but the disease. Not just punishing an individual, but transforming an institution. Not just reacting to an incident, but setting a new precedent. As the plane climbed higher, Kimberly opened her laptop to review some documents. In her email, she found an internal organizational climate survey that had been implemented as part of the new policies. The results were promising. 78% of employees reported feeling more respected in the workplace compared to 45% the previous year. It was only a beginning, Kimberly knew. Real cultural change would take years, maybe decades. There would be setbacks, resistance, moments of doubt. But for the first time, she felt she wasn't fighting alone. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a social media notification. Ashley had posted a photo of the new diversity committee, made up of employees from different departments, ages, ethnicities, and backgrounds. The caption read, "It's not about being perfect, it's about being willing to grow." Kimberly smiled, remembering her own journey of growth. How many times had she swallowed her pride in the face of racist comments to avoid making a scene? How many times had she felt alone in meetings where she was the only black woman? How many times had she doubted whether she truly belonged in those spaces? And now, here she was, not just belonging, but redefining what it meant to belong. The tea. Plane reached cruising altitude. The seatbelt sign turned off. A flight attendant approached, offering a drink. "Champagne to celebrate something, Ms. Johnson?" she asked with a genuine smile. Kimberly thought for a moment, then nodded. "Yes, to celebrate how far we've come, and the road still ahead." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. It really helps those of us just starting out. Now, back to the story. As she sipped her champagne, Kimberly felt a rare sense of contentment. Not complete satisfaction, because she knew the work for equality would never truly be finished, but clarity about the purpose of her journey. She remembered the words of her mother, a public school teacher who'd raised 2 daughters alone after her husband's early passing. "You'll walk into places people like us have never been, Kimberly. And when you do, don't let the door close behind you. Hold it open so others can follow." Kimberly had taken that advice to heart. In every position she'd held, at every company she'd worked for, she'd always sought to pave the way for others. She mentored young black professionals, insisted on inclusive hiring processes, and challenged discriminatory practices. But she had never had as much power to drive change as she did now. Her phone rang. It was a call from her sister, Melissa. "Hey there, exec, are you on the plane yet?" Melissa asked, her voice carrying the Georgian accent Kimberly had partly lost after years in New York City. "We just took off. I'll be there in 2 hours." "Mom's so excited. She's invited half the neighborhood for Sunday lunch. Everyone wants to see the famous daughter." Melissa laughed. "By the way, folks here at home won't stop talking about that speech of yours. You're a national hero now, you know." Kimberly smiled. "Don't exaggerate. I just did what needed to be done. That's why you're amazing, sis, too. It seems simple, but what you did gave hope to so many people." Melissa paused, including that flight attendant. "How's she doing?" "Ashley. She's fine, working hard, facing criticism but growing from it. You were really generous with her, you know. Not everyone would have been." Kimberly thought for a moment. "It wasn't generosity, Melissa. It was strategy. Some battles you win by punishing your opponents, others by turning them into allies." After hanging up, Kimberly returned to the documents she was reviewing. Among them was a report on the first results of the diversity program. Liberty Airways had promoted more women and black employees in the past 6 months than in the previous 3 years combined. Reports of discrimination and harassment had initially risen as employees gained confidence in the new system, then began to decline, a sign that practices were truly changing. Most impressive, though, was the business impact. After a brief period of turbulence, the company's stock had stabilized and started climbing. The positive fallout from the case had strengthened the brand. Passengers reported noticing a difference in onboard treatment. Liberty Airways was becoming known not just as a company that talked about diversity, but one that practiced it concretely. But to Kimberly, the real success wasn't in the numbers or the press. It was in the small stories that reached her. The lesbian flight attendant who finally felt safe mentioning her wife to co-workers, the check-in agent who now knew how to properly address transgender passengers, the Southern pilot who no longer had to hide his accent to sound more professional. And of course, there was Ashley's story. A few weeks earlier, Kimberly had received an unexpected invitation. Ashley had asked her to dinner at her home to meet her family. Hesitant at first, their relationship was strictly professional. Kimberly eventually agreed. Ashley's home was modest, in a neighborhood on New York City's East Side. Kimberly was greeted with a warm hug from the flight attendant, who introduced her to her mother, Dorothy, a 70-year-old woman who, despite Alzheimer's, had moments of clarity, and her 10-year-old twins, Ethan and Emma. During dinner, Kimberly noticed how the house, though simple, was full of love and dignity. She saw how Ashley juggled caring for her mother, helping the kids with homework and preparing the meal. She saw the strength of a woman who had long feared losing everything she'd built. At one point, while Ashley was in the kitchen, Dorothy approached Kimberly with a photo album. "Look, this is Ashley when she was tiny," the older woman said, showing a photo of a smiling little girl. "She's always been determined. Even as a child, she said she'd work on airplanes." Kimberly smiled, studying the photo. "Ms. Dorothy, do you know where your family is originally from?" The elderly woman thought for a moment, her eyes momentarily clouded by the confusion typical of Alzheimer's. Then, as if a light had switched on, she answered, "My mother came from Georgia. She was from a little town. What was the name? Near Atlanta." "Savannah?" suggested Kimberly, feeling a tingle down her spine. Dorothy smiled, her eyes lighting up. "That's it, Savannah. Do you know it?" Kimberly nodded, stunned. Savannah was the town where her own grandmother had been born before moving to Atlanta. When Ashley returned from the kitchen, Kimberly couldn't hold back the question. "Ashley, what was your grandmother's maiden name?" Ashley seemed surprised by the question. "Jackson, Elizabeth Jackson." "Why?" Kimberly felt a shiver. Jackson was a common last name, but Elizabeth... My grandmother was also from Savannah, and her name was Elizabeth too. The two women looked at each other, a new understanding dawning between them. This wasn't just coincidence. In a country built on migration, slavery, and the mixing of peoples, how often did family stories intersect without anyone knowing? "Maybe our families have known each other longer than we realized," said Ashley, her voice thick with emotion. "Maybe fate has its own ways of righting wrongs," Kimberly replied. That night marked a transformation in their relationship. They weren't just boss and subordinate, weren't just allies in a common cause. There was a deeper bond, a connection that went beyond the present, rooted in family histories that intertwined. Back in the present, on the plane to Atlanta, Kimberly reflected on this unexpected connection. Maybe that was why she couldn't simply punish Ashley and move on. Maybe, unconsciously, she'd recognized something familiar in her, something that went beyond the incident on the plane. The captain announced they were beginning their descent into Atlanta. Kimberly put away her documents and looked out the window, watching the city where she'd been born draw closer. The beaches, the historic downtown, the neighborhoods spread across the hilly landscape. She thought of her mother, who still lived in the same modest house where Kimberly had grown up, who still taught at the same public school, who never stopped believing her daughter could go beyond the limits society tried to impose. She thought of her sister Melissa, who'd chosen a different path, becoming a social worker and serving vulnerable communities in Atlanta, who often teased Kimberly, saying that while her older sister was changing the system from within, she preferred fighting in the trenches. She thought of her grandmother Elizabeth, whom she'd never met, but whose story of strength had inspired generations, who'd left Savannah with just a bundle of clothes and the dream of a better life for her children. And she thought finally of the strange path that had led her to this moment. A painful incident, a viral video, a controversial decision, and how all of it had turned into an opportunity not just to change a company, but to rediscover lost connections. to understand that sometimes our stories are more intertwined than we imagine. The plane touched down gently on Georgian soil. As she disembarked, Kimberly was greeted by her mother and sister, who waited eagerly in the airport lobby. Their hugs were long, filled with longing and pride. "My famous daughter," her mother said, touching Kimberly's face with hands calloused from decades in the classroom. "I always knew you'd go far," Kimberly smiled, feeling like that little girl who dreamed of conquering the world again. "Mum, do you remember Grandma Elizabeth?" Kimberly asked as they walked to the car. "Did she have relatives in New York City?" Her mother seemed surprised by the question. "Not that I know of. Why?" "I met someone who might have a connection to our family. A woman named Ashley, granddaughter of an Elizabeth who also came from Savannah." Her mother thought for a moment. "Oh, wait. There was a cousin of Grandma's who moved to New York City in the 1950s. She married a man there and never came back. What was her name?" Kimberly's mother furrowed her brow, trying to remember. "I think it was also Elizabeth. Or Margaret. Something like that." Melissa, who was listening to the conversation while driving, laughed. "So that flight attendant could be our distant relative. That's crazy." Kimberly nodded thoughtfully. "Life has these encounters, and sometimes it puts us face to face with the people we need to meet, even if the beginning is rough." During the weekend in Atlanta, Kimberly allowed herself to disconnect from work and reconnect with her roots. She visited her old school, walked through the streets of the neighborhood where she grew up, and reunited with childhood friends. On one of these outings, she ran into her old history teacher, Ms. Jenkins, now retired but still involved in community projects. "Kimberly Johnson, I can't believe it," the teacher exclaimed when she saw her entering the community library she helped manage. "I saw you on TV the other day. So proud." The two talked for over an hour. Kimberly shared her journey, the challenges she'd faced, the incident on the plane, and what happened afterward. "You know what it reminded me of when I saw that video," Ms. Jenkins said. "That time in 3rd grade, when you weren't chosen to represent the school in the math competition, even though you had the highest score. Remember?" Kimberly remembered. She had cried for days. Another student, white and from a wealthier family, had been chosen instead. "The principal said I didn't fit the profile to represent the school," Kimberly recalled. "And you know what you did?" Ms. Jenkins asked, her eyes shining. "You didn't fight with the other girl. You offered to help her prepare. You studied together for weeks, and she ended up winning the gold medal." Kimberly smiled, surprised she still remembered that episode. "Jennifer. Her name was Jennifer." "Exactly, and do you know what happened to her? She graduated in engineering just like you, works for a multinational company, and to this day, she talks about you as the person who changed her life." Ms. Jenkins touched Kimberly's arm. "What you did now with that flight attendant is the same thing you did with Jennifer. You turned a rival into an ally. And that, my dear, is true leadership." On Sunday, as planned, Kimberly's mother hosted a big lunch. The modest house was filled with neighbors, family, and friends, all eager to hear the stories of the neighborhood's illustrious daughter. Amid the chatter and laughter, Kimberly noticed her mother in a corner, flipping through an old family album. She walked over and sat beside her. "What are you looking at, Mom?" "Old photos. Look, this one is of Grandma Elizabeth," she pointed to a yellowed photograph of a serious-looking black woman wearing a simple dress. "She was strong like you, raised 6 children alone after her husband left." Kimberly studied the photo closely. There was something familiar in the woman's eyes, a determination she recognized in herself. "Mom, do you think Grandma would be proud of me?" Her mother looked at her, surprised by the question. "Proud? Honey, she'd be over the moon." She set the album aside and held Kimberly's hands. "You're not just fulfilling your dreams. You're fulfilling the dreams she never even let herself have." Those words touched Kimberly deeply. No matter how much professional success she'd achieved, no matter how often her face appeared in newspapers and magazines, there were still moments when she wondered if she was on the right path, if her choices really made a difference. On Monday, before returning to New York City, Kimberly made one last stop, the cemetery where her grandmother Elizabeth was buried. She placed a simple bouquet of flowers on the grave and stood there for a few minutes in silence. "Grandma," she thought, "we have a lot of work ahead of us. but we're making progress. Step by step, we're transforming spaces that were once denied to us. And when we encounter obstacles, we don't destroy them, we turn them into bridges. Back in New York City on Tuesday, Kimberly found her desk piled with reports, meeting requests, and pending decisions. Among the documents was a personal envelope. Inside, a handmade card with colorful drawings. It was from Ethan and Emma, Ashley's children. "Thank you for believing in our mum. She smiles so much more now." Kimberly smiled, tucking the card into her drawer. Just then her phone rang. It was Ashley. "Good morning, Kimberly. How was your weekend in Atlanta?" "Rejuvenating and eye-opening." Kimberly paused. "Ashley, my mother confirmed it. There really was a relative of my grandmother who went to New York City. I think we need to look deeper into this story." "Really? That's... wow!" Ashley sounded genuinely surprised. "Who would have thought we'd start as adversaries and end up discovering we might be related?" "Life has its twists and turns, doesn't it?" Kimberly replied. "Speaking of which, how's the committee coming along?" "Making progress. Actually, that's why I'm calling. We have some preliminary results I'd like to present in person. Are you free today?" Kimberly checked her schedule. "I have an opening at 3 p.m. Does that work?" "Perfect. See you then." Hanging up, Kimberly gazed out her office window, watching the Liberty Airways planes lined up on the runway. Each one carried not just passengers, but stories. Stories of people like her and Ashley living in a country still marked by inequality, yet fighting in their own ways to change it. 6 months after that fateful flight, the incident that could have been just another reported and forgotten case of racism had become a catalyst for real change. Liberty Airways had become a benchmark for diversity and inclusion policies. The committee led by Ashley had identified and corrected dozens of discriminatory practices within the company. Employees reported feeling safer reporting abuses and more respected in their workplace. But beyond the organizational changes, there was personal transformation. Kimberly, who had fought alone for so long, carving paths in hostile environments, now found herself surrounded by allies, people willing not just to follow her lead, but to genuinely join the journey of building a fairer, more inclusive company. And Ashley, who had nearly lost everything that day on the plane, had found not just a new professional purpose, but also a deeper understanding of herself. No longer a victim or an accomplice to an oppressive system, but an agent of change. Exactly 3 p.m., Ashley knocked on Kimberly's office door. She walked in carrying a folder of documents and, to Kimberly's surprise, a small wrapped gift box. "What's this?" Kimberly asked, intrigued. "Open it," Ashley replied with a smile. Inside the box, Kimberly found a silver pendant shaped like an airplane with a small blue stone embedded in it. "It's Carolina blue topaz," Ashley explained. "A rare stone found only in North Carolina and parts of Africa. It symbolizes the journey between continents, the connection between distant origins, like your family's story, our family's story." Kimberly held the pendant, moved. It was a simple gift, but full of meaning. "It's beautiful, Ashley, thank you. I'm the one who should be thanking you, Kimberly, for everything." Ashley paused, as if carefully choosing her next words. "You know, the other day a reporter asked me if I regretted what happened on that flight, and I said no. I don't regret the moment I questioned your place in first class." Kimberly raised her eyebrows, surprised. "No? No. Because if I hadn't made that mistake, if you hadn't been the person you are, none of this would have happened." Ashley gestured, around indicating everything they had achieved. "Sometimes we need to get lost to find the right path." Kimberly smiled, placing the pendant on her desk. "Maybe that's the true meaning of transformation. It's not about never making mistakes. It's about what we do with them." The two women spent the meeting discussing the committee's results, planning their next steps, and dreaming of a future where stories like theirs wouldn't have to be exceptions anymore. A future where people of all colors, genders, and backgrounds could simply exist in every space, without questions, without suspicion, without constantly having to prove their worth or their right to belong. It was an ambitious dream, perhaps even utopian. But as Kimberly's mother used to say, quoting her grandmother Elizabeth, "Even the longest journey begins with a single step, And those two women, brought together by fate in the most unlikely way, were taking many steps together. The end. Dear listener, what did you think of this story of overcoming and transformation? Prejudice still exists in our daily lives, and often it's the small actions that make a difference. Leave your like, share this with someone who needs to hear this message, and subscribe to the channel for more heartwarming stories.